Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side.
Well, hello, everybody. No, your ears are not deceiving you. This is a brand new episode and the beginning of season 2 of Weird True Crime. We definitely took a much longer break than anticipated. Sorry about that. But, life. Just so many things. It was a much needed reset for us to be able to figure out what direction our creepy corner of chaos will go in. And I guess time with a family wasn't a bad thing either.
Hanging out with our kids and husbands is okay and, small doses, but it's nice to be back in our little safe corner of creepy.
Also, just want to give a huge welcome shout out to all of the new listeners who found us while we were on our month-long turned 9-month break. Thank you so much for enjoying our creepy corner enough to follow and stick around. We've missed the podcast and are definitely excited to jump back in with more of the unsolved, missing, and lesser-known cases that deserve more attention. And of course, you can't forget the dumb criminals Reddit stories and deep dives into the weirder side of true crime.
No, definitely can't forget all of the dumb criminals that bring us so much joy in an otherwise dark world. But today, we are discussing a solved local Austin case that was featured on Dateline in 48 Hours at the beginning of 2024. And complete transparency, I started writing this script then, and then life happened, and here we are, finally talking about it 9 months later. But, better late than never in a lot of circumstances. And since this podcast began, I've wanted to cover this case because the victims were important members of the Austin community and worked with so many people, including myself and several friends. They were kind, welcoming, and genuinely caring people, and I'm so glad I got to spend a little time in their orbit. So let's get into it, shall we? I'm Gina.
And I'm Amber.
And this is the story of the murder of Ted Shaughnessy and the attempted murder of Corey Shaughnessy.
Ted and Corey Shaughnessy met at a video arcade in Phoenix, Arizona in the early 1980s, which is just freaking adorable. They married in the late 80s and eventually settled here in Austin, Texas, where they opened Gallery Jewelers in the heart of the city. Ted loved gemstones and was very much a people person. He genuinely enjoyed getting to know his customers and understanding the motivations behind their purchases. While Ted handled most of the customer interactions, Corey was also a familiar and friendly face in the shop, working hard at appraising jewelry pieces. While their professional lives were thriving, something was missing: a child. Unfortunately, Corey struggled with carrying a pregnancy to term. And any woman who's experienced pregnancy loss knows how devastating it can be. Despite these challenges, Corey knew that raising a child was more important to her than carrying one, so they decided to adopt. In 2000, they traveled to Ukraine, where they adopted Nicholas, who was just 16 months old. He was walking, but still in that adorable, chubby baby stage. Corey told the show 48 Hours that they won him over with animal crackers, and it wasn't long before they were back home, a family of 3. Ted and Corey poured their hearts into being the best parents they could be for Nicholas. Ted and Nick were inseparable, and as Nick grew older, Ted shared his love of racing with him. The two of them spent countless hours together at the track, bonding over their shared passion.
I want to take a minute to explain my connection to Ted and Corey. Back in 2011, when my Corey and I started talking about getting married, several of our friends recommended Gallery Jewelers. See, they had worked with Ted and Corey for their engagement rings and wedding sets and had nothing but good things to say. So we decided to visit Gallery to meet Ted and Corey and browse our options. As soon as we walked in, we were greeted by their two giant Rottweilers. I know the dogs were there for protection, but honestly, they were both huge teddy bears. I probably spent more time petting the dogs than looking at rings, which isn't a surprise to anyone who knows me.
Shocked face.
Ted and Corey were incredibly welcoming and friendly. I remember Ted asking me if I had a style in mind, and within 5 minutes, I was looking at the perfect vintage subtle engagement ring with a peridot gemstone. Ted was so excited that I wanted my birthstone instead of a diamond because he really did genuinely love gemstones. He also found a perfect matching wedding band that curved to fit the engagement ring. They were genuinely happy for us, and we ended up talking with them for a solid hour about all sorts of topics. We left that day feeling like we had made new friends, and a couple weeks later, Corey went back and secretly bought the ring that I had fallen in love with, and I've been wearing it ever since. It wasn't until several months after the murder that I found out Ted had been killed. I remember feeling disbelief, wondering who would ever want to hurt such a genuinely kind person.
Let's fast forward to 2018. Ted and Corey celebrated their 30th anniversary in January and were now empty nesters. Their son Nick was living in College Station with his girlfriend, Jacqueline Edison. Nick and Jackie had met at Austin High School and had been dating since 2016. When asked about Nick and Jackie's relationship, Corey mentioned that they liked many of the same things, such as fancy clothes and cars. The couple was very focused on their appearance. I think the word we're looking for here is materialistic. In 2017, Nick and Jackie moved to College Station, where Jackie attended Texas A&M and Nick started day trading. He had been day trading for several years and must have been fairly successful at it, as some of Ted and Corey's friends trusted him with sizable sums of money to invest. Nick was determined to be successful and earn a large income without going to college. But with no steady job, you might wonder where he was getting the money for day trading. Ted and Corey had loaned him $30,000, explaining that this was equivalent to what they might spend on his college education. They made it clear that if he lost the money, he would need to get a job and find another source of income. This loan shows how much they believed in his potential. However, Corey still hoped that Nick would eventually come to his senses and enroll in college.
Ted and Corey were living a typical, sometimes monotonous life. They'd get up, go to work, come home, eat dinner, watch TV, go to bed, and do it all over again the next day. And that's exactly how their night went on March 1st, 2018. But around 4:30 a.m. on March 2nd, their dog started barking. This wasn't unusual. They often barked if there was a deer or possum in the yard. Many dog owners can probably relate to their pets barking in the middle of the night for similar reasons or no reason at all, such as the life with dogs. So Ted got up to see what was going on, grabbing the gun he kept near his side of the bed. Corey turned over, ready to go back to sleep, when she suddenly heard gunshots outside of their bedroom. She got up, grabbed the .380 she kept on her side of the bed, and headed toward the kitchen, just outside of their bedroom. But she couldn't see anything. A bright white light was shining directly into her eyes. The only thing she could make out was the barrel of a gun. Trigger warning here. She saw one of their Rottweilers, Bart, get shot and killed instantly. Then, Corey saw her husband of 30 years, Ted, lying on the floor next to the dining room table, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. The bright light made it impossible to see the intruders, so she fired in the direction of the light until she ran out of ammo. Desperate and terrified, Corey ran back to their bedroom, hid in Ted's closet, and called 911.
Corey was sure she was going to die. She later told Dateline that she called 911 so someone would at least know to come and find her body. The 911 call is heartbreaking. Corey sounds scared and confused. She tells the dispatcher she wants to check on Ted, who can be heard moaning in the background. The dispatcher urges her to stay hidden and keep out of sight. assuring her that the police are on their way. When dispatch informs her that the police have arrived, Corey walks quickly through the kitchen, stepping over broken glass from the shattered windows, and opens the front door. But no one's there. Now she's out in the open, vulnerable with no cover or protection and no police in sight. It turns out that the police had mistakenly gone to the house next door instead of the Shaughnessy home. While this seems like a shocking mistake, there were no streetlights in the neighborhood and the houses looked very similar. Both even had white Mercedes sedan in the driveway. Officers Paul Sallow and James Moore were the first to arrive at the correct house and said Corey was absolutely distraught. They sat her in one of the police cars while they secured the scene. Inside, they found Ted Shaughnessy lying near the kitchen table. He had been shot in the head, back, thigh, and rear end. Broken glass from the windows covered the floor, along with .40 caliber and .380 caliber bullet casings. Corey had used her .380 revolver to defend herself, indicating that there were at least 2 attackers involved. Corey then called their son Nicholas, who was in College Station, to tell him what had happened to Ted. It was about 5 a.m. by then. Nick and Jacqueline wasted no time, driving straight to Austin and arriving at the house around 8 a.m.
During the initial investigation, Officers Sallow and Moore noticed that someone had removed the screen from a downstairs bedroom window and set it against the house. This window, which was unlocked, was Nick's childhood bedroom window. The window was dusted for fingerprints. But that wasn't the only interesting detail in Nick's old room. Inside, they found an open dresser drawer containing an empty .40 caliber gun case. Remember, .40 caliber bullets had been found near Ted's body. Could this missing gun have been used in the shooting? When police asked Corey about the missing gun, she said it was supposed to be at Gallery Jewelers in the office. You can probably guess where this is going. When she took them to the store to look for it, the gun was nowhere to be found. The Shaughnessy's owned around 20 guns, which they kept in various places throughout their home. While that might sound like a lot, it's understandable given that they had a significant amount of high-value jewelry in their home and had previously experienced a break-in. It made sense for them to want to be able to defend themselves from anywhere in the house, if needed.
It's not a small coincidence that out of 20 guns, the one that's missing is the same caliber as one of the guns used in the shooting. Because of the prior break-in, Corey and the investigators initially thought the shooting had been a robbery gone wrong. They considered the possibility that the .40 caliber gun had been stolen during the break-in and then was used by the intruders when Ted discovered them. Remember, Corey couldn't see the shooters because of the bright light shining in her eyes, so she couldn't provide investigators with any details about the people who had killed her husband and tried to kill her. Assistant District Attorney Amy Meredith, who was called in to help preserve and process the scene, had a different perspective. While the investigators believed it was a robbery gone wrong, DA Meredith thought the Shaughnessy's probably knew their attackers. She pointed out that the house was too big and dark for strangers to navigate easily in the middle of the night. DA Meredith also noted that the only thing missing from the home was the .40 caliber pistol. If the intruders were looking for jewels or cash, they would have ransacked the house in search for valuables. They wouldn't have been satisfied with just taking one gun from a specific location.
In the weeks following Ted's murder, Nick and Jackie moved back into the Shaughnessy home so Corey wouldn't have to be alone. Corey told Dateline that she couldn't sleep and would stay awake until sunrise. She even set up zones in the house, planning where she would go and how she would defend herself if someone came back for her. The fear she must have felt, knowing that whoever killed her husband and tried to kill her was still out there, is unimaginable. And determined to figure out what had happened, Corey, Nick, and Jackie reenacted the events of that night multiple times. The blinding light from that night was a major source of frustration for Corey, as she couldn't figure out what type of device it was coming from. She tested several different flashlights, including those blindingly bright pen lights, but none of them matched. One day, though, It finally clicked. Jackie showed Corey the light from her cell phone, and Corey realized that that was the blinding light she had seen while fighting for her life. While this discovery didn't answer the questions of who or why, it was at least one piece of the puzzle put into place.
The light source wasn't the only thing weighing on Corey's mind. She felt as though the investigators were treating her more like a suspect than a victim. They asked her to hand over the clothes she had been wearing during the murder as evidence, and they gave her a gunshot residue test, even though she had already admitted to firing a gun in self-defense. The autopsy had shown that none of the bullets Corey fired had hit Ted. Feeling targeted, Corey brought an attorney with her to the final interview with investigators, a smart move given the circumstances. It's worth noting that some of Corey's actions after Ted's death might have appeared suspicious to those investigating the murder. You gotta look at it from all angles. There was no funeral held for Ted, which might have raised eyebrows among people who weren't close to the family. However, it's possible that Ted had specified in his will or told Corey that he didn't want a funeral. Investigators also found it odd that Corey asked about having the house cleaned soon after the murder. But when you consider that she was a grieving widow, continuing to live in a home where strangers had been and where her husband of 30 years was brutally murdered, her actions make much more sense. A clean house might have helped her feel less violated and more in control rather than living in constant reminder of the crime scene.
And though it may have felt to Corey like the detectives were targeting her, she wasn't the only person under investigation. The fingerprints found on Nick's bedroom window frame belonged to a man who used to assemble windows for Renewal by Anderson, a well-known window company in the area. However, he had been living out of state for years and was nowhere near the home on the night of the murders. I kind of found this fascinating, though, and it really made me start wondering how many fingerprints might be on my own windows and door frames that don't belong to people that I know. And it really creeps me out if I think about it. So I'm just going to move away from that one. Detective Sallow and Moore were also looking into a man who had previously robbed a pawn shop the Shaughnessy's owned, doing so at gunpoint. During that incident, Ted shot the man in self-defense, leading to the robber's imprisonment. Although he was later released, he too was nowhere near the area on the night of the murder. So with two potential suspects ruled out, there was still one more person on Sallow and Moore's radar, Nicholas, Ted and Corey's son. Corey believed that the investigators were looking at Nick for the same reason they were looking at her. It was the easiest resolution. She even went so far as to hire a defense lawyer for Nick to protect him from the probing questions and constant surveillance. After all, Nick was asleep 2 hours away in College Station at the time of the murder. But Detective Sallow and Moore found Nick's behavior on the morning of the murder a little odd. One of the first things he asked them was if Ted had suffered when he was shot. I have to be honest, I've never experienced anything like this, but if I found out a loved one had been shot to death, my first questions would be why and who. Amber, I'm curious to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would definitely be asking who the fluff did this, why did they do it? But, I mean, knowing that a loved one is now gone, I would be curious if they had suffered or not. I think it kind of really depends on, I guess, how you're asking.
And people handle things different ways.
Yeah.
And so maybe that was the first thing that popped in his head was, did my father suffer? You know, so that makes sense.
And yeah, like that, shock, like, oh my God, did he suffer? That could be one of the only comforts that that you can get when a loved one dies is if they didn't suffer. But I mean, if you're sitting there asking like, oh, well, did he suffer? Like, there's two ways you can look at it. So
what's the tone there? I would be curious to know.
The tone, that is the 4-letter word that escaped my brain there for a moment.
Tone. It's all about the tone.
Tone.
Yeah, for sure.
The strange question wasn't the only thing officers found off-putting. Nick was unusually chipper and upbeat for someone whose father had just been killed. Tone. In a video taken at the scene, you can see him doing a happy jump turn when asked to turn around. Nick kept trying to talk to the media, and investigators had to stop him on more than one occasion. Detectives also noticed Nick walking to the back of the house to examine the window screen that had been removed. This was odd because no one had told him this was where the intruders had entered. And it was at the back of the house, out of eyesight. So, how did he know to check the window? Nick showed investigators the app on his phone connected to the home security system, which indicated that his bedroom window had been opened at 4:27 a.m. Well, this notification could explain why he went to check on the window. 17 minutes later, at 4:44 a.m., there was a glass break notification when gunshots shattered a window. Ted and Corey only set the house alarm when they weren't home, so they weren't alerted when the intruders first entered. While investigators initially believed they were dealing with a robbery gone wrong and the DA suspected an inside job, Nick had his own theory about why his parents were targeted. He told investigators that their neighbor, Kim, had paid him to follow her husband, whom she was in the process of divorcing, because she suspected he was cheating on her. Nick had placed a tracking device on the husband's car, which Kim could monitor via an app. Nick and the investigators wondered if the intruders had actually been targeting Kim, but mistakenly went to the wrong house. As mentioned before, both houses had a white Mercedes out front, visibility was low, and the home styles were very similar. Even Corey thought it wasn't a big stretch to think a mix-up could have happened. However, when investigators questioned Kim about Nick's story, she said her ex-husband never found out he was being followed and would have nothing to gain from her death. This theory was ruled out pretty quickly.
Detectives took Nick to the station for a more formal interview after noting his strange behavior at the crime scene. When asked why he had checked his bedroom window, Nick explained that when he lived in the house, he used it like a door to get in and out. He claimed that he always locked the window, but admitted he might have forgotten if he had been drunk or something. Nick told them he hadn't been home in at least a month, so if the window had been left unlocked, it had been that way for quite some time. I want to note that from the recording of his police interview, it seemed like Nick mainly used the window to sneak out late at night to drink in the backyard after having dinner with his parents and then waiting for them to go to bed. His statement about using the window to get in and out of the house doesn't make much sense. Unless he was constantly sneaking out, even during the day, he likely used the main doors more often, as most people do. During the interview, Nick admitted that there had been some tension between him and his parents related to the $30,000 loan they had given him for day trading. Nick was supposed to make monthly payments to Ted and Corey for his gas, car, and car insurance, but hadn't been keeping up with his part of the deal. Even though he wasn't paying them, Corey noticed that every time she saw Nick and Jackie, they were wearing new clothes, shoes, and other expensive items. They were spending money on what they wanted while neglecting their responsibilities. This wasn't the first time Ted and Corey had dealt with this type of situation with Nick, but they had reached their limit. They told him they were cutting him off because he wasn't honoring their agreement. Nick acknowledged to the detectives that there had been financial issues, but he claimed to have paid his parents back a few months before the murder, which had smoothed things over. Detectives Sallow and Moore wanted to know more, so they continued digging into Nick's financials and obtained a search warrant for his apartment in College Station.
For someone who claimed to be a natural at day trading, Nick's overdrawn accounts told a different story. He had lost all of the money his parents had loaned him. I'm not surprised, honestly.
Not one bit.
The search warrant gave investigators access to security footage from the cameras Nick had installed outside their apartment in College Station. The footage confirmed that Nick and Jackie were home at the time of the murder, just as they had claimed. However, investigators found a few surprising items in the apartment. One of these was a marriage certificate showing that Nick and Jackie had married on July 17th, 2017. This was news not only to the investigators, but also to Corey, who had no idea that her only child had been married for 8 months. Corey's reaction to the news says a lot about her as a person. Instead of feeling angry or bitter, she decided to help them plan a second wedding. Corey had never fully warmed up to Jackie, but now that Jackie was officially part of the family, Corey chose to open her heart and her home to her. Corey asked Jackie to choose an engagement ring from the case at Gallery and set her mother's diamond into it. She also gifted Jackie a half-carat diamond necklace to welcome her into the family. This was in addition to letting them move into the house and likely covering most of their expenses, which were increasing by the day. With the pressure of keeping Gallery running and managing all of the other costs, Corey decided it was time to collect Ted's $1 million life insurance policy.
But when Corey called to start the process of collecting Ted's life insurance policy, she was told it couldn't be released because police suspected foul play in Ted's death. At this point, she believed the investigators thought she had something to do with the murder. Why else would she be unable to access the money left to her? I think most people in her situation would feel the same way. However, what Corey didn't know is that she had been cleared early on in the investigation. Remember that search of Nick and Jackie's apartment in College Station? Well, in addition to the security footage and marriage certificate, investigators also found guns and ammunition. One of the ammo boxes was missing 6 SIG 380 caliber bullets. Sound familiar? That's one of the same types of ammunition used in the murder. And while coincidences happen and missing ammo alone isn't enough to convict someone, the investigators were definitely starting to raise their eyebrows. Looking to gather more information, the police brought in a digital forensics team to analyze Nick and Jackie's cell phones. This is no small task, considering how much data people can store on their phones, especially two college-age individuals who likely lived their lives through their devices. So imagine the digital forensics team's surprise when they found significant gaps in data on both Nick and Jackie's phones. It looked like they had factory reset the phones and wiped the memories clean.
There's an interesting thing about cell phones, especially iPhones. They sync to other Apple devices. So while Nick may have erased any questionable communications from his phone, investigators found all that data on his Mac Mini. The recovered data included a series of text messages between Nick and Jackie on February 23rd and 24th. In the text, Nick says he's, quote, working on it, end quote. And Jackie replies asking if they want $50,000 because they can't afford to pay half before. Nick then texts Jackie asking her to withdraw money from the bank so that, if it happens, they'll have cash in hand. And she did just that. Jackie withdrew money from their bank account days before Ted's death. Investigators found more incriminating evidence on Nick's phone, including location data showing that Nick had been at his parents' house 2 days before the murder. This contradicted Nick's claim that he hadn't been home in at least a month. Additionally, cell activity revealed that Nick had opened the security app for Ted and Corey's home just 5 minutes before Corey called to tell him about the shooting. Corey had called Nick at 5 a.m., so why would he be awake and monitoring his parents' house 2 hours away at that early hour? With these discoveries, Detectives Sallow and Moore grew even more suspicious and turned to Nick's close friend, Spencer Patterson, for further information. Remember Nick's odd statement about using his bedroom window to enter and exit his parents' home? When questioned further, Nick explained that Spencer also used the window to come and go during their late-night drinking sessions in the backyard. Nick also admitted to giving Spencer a .380 caliber pistol, the same type as one of the guns used in the murder. When Spencer was brought in for questioning, he admitted to having the .380 caliber pistol and handed it over to the police, along with his phone, for testing. Spencer's cell phone data proved that he was at home at the time of the murder, and ballistics testing showed that his gun had not been used in the crime. Spencer was cleared as a suspect, but he provided some crucial information during his police interview.
Spencer told investigators that he got ordained online to officiate Nick and Jackie's secret wedding. He also revealed that Nick had mentioned that after his parents go, he would have $8 million from life insurance, Gallery Jewelers, and their property in Austin. According to Spencer, Nick even offered him money to kill his parents, but he declined. Ted and Corey were like a second family to Spencer. He spent a lot of time at the Shaughnessy home and looked up to them. He would never hurt them. I can't help but wonder if Spencer felt this was a real threat to Ted and Corey's lives. We can't know for sure since we weren't there for the conversation, but maybe Spencer didn't take Nick's request seriously. Perhaps Nick was venting about the financial problems he was dealing with, and Spencer thought he was just speaking out of anger. It's also possible that Nick had a temper, and Spencer kept quiet to protect himself. And while I didn't find any additional information about whether Spencer believed Nick really wanted his parents dead, I really hope that if Spencer felt it was a legitimate threat, he would have told someone. Meanwhile, it was the beginning of May, and 2 months had passed since Ted's death. Corey was busy planning a wedding and supporting Nick and Jackie, who were still living in her house, completely unaware that investigators were focusing on them as their main suspects. She also had no idea that investigators were concerned for her safety, knowing that she was just as much a target as Ted had been.
On May 18, 2018, Nick and Jackie were arrested for solicitation of murder in Nick's attorney's office. Investigators didn't believe they had pulled the trigger, but they had enough evidence to prove they were involved. Corey told 48 Hours that when she read the affidavits, she thought some of the statements Nick and Jackie made might have been taken out of context. She wondered if they had been blackmailed or pressured into having her and Ted killed. Corey couldn't believe that Nick and Jackie would actually want to kill them, which is completely understandable. No parent wants to think that their child would want them dead. It's the last thing you imagine as a parent. You hope there's a logical explanation for why your loving child would get caught up in something like this, because there's no way you can believe they would willingly do it. Nick and Corey weren't allowed to communicate because of the ongoing investigation, but a family friend delivered letters back and forth, and Corey sent him money for magazines or other items he needed. That's the definition of an unwavering mother. Your child is in jail for soliciting to kill you, and you're still sending him money for snacks.
That's a mom.
It's a mom.
For sure.
As for Jackie, she was released on bond 2 weeks after her arrest because investigators believed that Nick was the one spearheading the murder-for-hire plot, and she just happened to be involved. In her police interview, Jackie placed all the blame on Nick. She claimed he was struggling financially with thousands of dollars in overdue loans and still owed his parents $30,000 from day trading. Jackie told investigators that Nick had asked her if she would stick around if he murdered someone and had hinted that Ted was unhappy and depressed, suggesting that killing Ted would give him relief. However, Jackie noted that Ted had never seemed unhappy or depressed when she saw him. Nick had also said that if Ted was gone, Corey wouldn't be able to cope, so she'd have to be, quote, quote, eliminated too.
Jackie insisted that she never took Nick's threats seriously, but she did admit knowing about the $1 million life insurance policies on both Ted and Corey. Jackie also confessed to discussing paying for the hit and even joked about someone doing it for $10 million. If she didn't take the threats seriously, why did she tell investigators that she accompanied Nick several times when he attempted to carry out his plan but never followed through? The police didn't buy her claims that she hadn't taken it seriously either. They didn't think she was actively hiring people or fully in on the plan, but she wasn't trying to stop it, knowing she stood to gain financially. Unfortunately, they didn't have enough evidence to prove she was actively involved, so Jackie was released on bond 2 weeks after her arrest, like we said. I have to say, I don't agree with this decision either, but the investigation wasn't over. The police were still trying to figure out who pulled the trigger. In July of 2018, Detective Moore gained access to the security footage from Nick and Jackie's porch in College Station. I'm not sure why it took so long to get this footage, considering they had the other security footage, but maybe some of the cameras were owned by the apartment complex and not installed by Nick. And that security footage showed two men arriving at Nick and Jackie's apartment on February 28th, 2018. One of the men was wearing a green Renewal by Anderson t-shirt. Sound familiar? Yeah, that's the same company where the man whose fingerprints were found on the window had worked. While this turned out to just be a really weird coincidence, it's a pretty strange one. The man on the security footage was identified as Cameron Bosnick, who had only worked at the window company for a few days back in 2014. Apparently, he really liked the shirt, if he was still wearing it years later. Investigators got to work tracking down Cameron and found his current residence. But when they got to his house, his wife answered the door and told them he wasn't home.
Cameron's wife knew exactly why the police were at her door. She informed the officers that several months earlier, Cameron had been contacted about a job opportunity by a man named Johnny Leon. Cameron went with Johnny to a guy named Nick's apartment, where Nick explained that he had people in Austin costing him $30,000 that needed to be, quote, quote, taken down. Cameron admitted that he didn't fully understand what was being asked of him and was told, quote, the less you know, the better, end quote. Realizing that whatever was going on wasn't good, Cameron decided to leave. Cameron cooperated with the investigation and told the detectives where Johnny Leon lived, so they tracked him down next. Johnny was identified as the other man in the security video and admitted to police that Nick had tried to hire him for the job. However, he claimed he didn't go through with it. Johnny did admit to traveling with Nick to Austin because Nick intended to commit the murders himself. They parked on a side road across from the house, and Nick went up to the house for a few minutes, but then returned to the car saying he was unsuccessful. The pair then drove back to College Station. Johnny may have told investigators he wasn't involved, but his cell phone data told a different story. It placed him in the area of Ted and Corey's house at the time of the shooting. Why don't these guys realize that their cell phones track their location? Johnny Leon was arrested and charged with capital murder. Although he refused to tell the police the name of the second shooter, Johnny's cell phone had all the information they needed.
Once again, your cell phone has everything. Like, just tell them what they want to know, but whatever. So Johnny had been texting a guy named Arian Smith, who lived in Fort Worth. Arian, like Johnny, had an arrest record, and they had been arrested together for drugs the previous year. When investigators tracked down Arian, he told them he was with his ex-girlfriend the night of the murders and that she would vouch for him. Arian's ex wanted nothing to do with this fake alibi and told them that he left her in a hotel room alone for several hours and wouldn't answer when she tried to call him. She also dropped a huge piece of information. Arian started carrying around a .40 caliber gun after the night of the murder. So, now that his alibi has been squashed, Arian starts talking. He admitted to the investigators that he met Nick and actually broke down crying during his second interview. Arian allegedly said that he couldn't sleep at night because he was involved and admitted to firing the fatal shots that killed Ted. He told the detectives that after shooting Ted, he and Johnny Leon heard a woman crying inside the house. According to Arian, he begged Johnny to leave the woman alone, so they fled. Arian told them where to find the .40 caliber used in the shooting and requested the death penalty. Look, it's good that he has remorse for taking someone's life, But he couldn't have felt that bad about it if he didn't turn himself in. That's just my 2 cents. Like, don't say that you are so distraught and feel awful for what you did if you were still gonna lie and try to get out of it. Like, I don't believe it.
Make it make sense.
It makes no sense. So now we have Nick Shaughnessy, Johnny Leon, and Arian Smith in jail with capital murder charges, which in Texas is a death sentence. And Corey still thinks it's all just a big misunderstanding at this point, until Nick's attorney fills her in on the latest details in the investigation.
Corey was told that Nick had indeed hired people to kill her and Ted because of ongoing disputes over money. The realization that she had been caring for the very people who tried to kill her was deeply painful. For months, Corey had bought their groceries, paid their bills, bought Jackie new clothes, and even helped plan their wedding. The betrayal she felt upon learning the truth was unimaginable. To make matters worse, Nick's attorney approached Corey, asking her to convince Nick to accept a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. Before agreeing, Corey needed to know if the gun used to kill Ted was the same missing gun from their home. Nick's attorney confirmed that it was. Nick had given the gun to Arian Smith. Armed with this information, Corey decided to write to Nick, urging him to take the plea deal. In her interview with 48 Hours, Corey shared that she told him, quote, he owed it to the memory of his father to tell the absolute truth, end quote. In April 2021, Nick, Leon, and Arian all pleaded guilty to murder, avoiding the death penalty. Each was sentenced to 35 years in prison with the possibility of parole. Jackie, meanwhile, pleaded guilty to attempted conspiracy to commit capital murder. She received deferred adjudication, which meant she was put on probation without a formal conviction. Jackie spent 120 days in jail and was sentenced to 10 years of probation, with a requirement to spend 2 days in prison each year on the anniversary of Ted's murder. Corey feels that the sentencing was completely unfair and believes Jackie was more involved than she admitted. Corey refused to attend Jackie's hearing, telling 48 Hours, quote, my husband is dead, my life is over. I'm supposed to be dead, and she gets probation, end quote. Jackie denied providing money to pay the hitman or being involved in the planning, claiming she tried to stop Nick. However, there was no evidence she made any effort to prevent the plan. In fact, Jackie had already chosen the car she planned to buy her mother with the money they would get from Corey and Ted's deaths. While Nick was in prison, Jackie divorced him. She continued her college education, spent time with friends and family, and even kept wearing the diamond pendant Corey had given her as a wedding gift.
Corey told 48 Hours that she hopes Nick's time in prison will give the person he becomes the opportunity to take the rest of his life and do something with it. He could be released at the age of 36, which is younger than we are right now, which is crazy to think about. And in an interview with Dateline, Nick admitted that he had paid 2 people to kill his parents. He expressed regret, saying he was sorry for everything that happened. According to Nick, he never would have gone through with it if it hadn't been for Jackie, describing their relationship as toxic. He acknowledged that he knew he would inherit his parents' money eventually, but admitted that he didn't want to wait. Nick mentioned he was seeking Jackie's approval. In the interview, Nick reflected on his life, saying he had everything he could have ever wanted. However, in his teenage years, he started searching for his purpose, which is complete bullshit. You're a teenager. Nobody knows their purpose as a teenager. He realized that as the sole heir, he would inherit everything if his parents weren't around. He said that the idea was initially talked about passively, but over time, those conversations became more serious. Nick described these discussions as, quote, sad conversations, end quote, saying he was creating a new life and was looking for validation.
Andrea Canning from Dateline asked Nick if he had a chip missing, pointing out that typically kids who are mad at their parents or want a new life don't resort to murder. Nick's response was vague. He kept saying he was a coward and claimed that any doubts he had were outweighed by Jackie's confidence. He also suggested that Jackie wasn't entirely honest about her role in the crime. Despite his statements, Nick did say that he would trade places with his father, Ted, if he could. While both Nick and Jackie are responsible for what happened, Nick's role was more significant. Investigators believe the main difference between the two is that Nick's actions involved his own parents, making his responsibility in the murder greater. The district attorney at the time of the plea deals, Jose Garza, chose not to give an interview. However, his office sent an email to 48 Hours stating, quote, "Our office takes acts of violence seriously and is committed to holding people who commit violent crimes accountable." End quote. For Jackie, if she violates the terms of her 10-year probation, she could face up to 25 years in prison.
Corey hasn't spoken to Nick since he was arrested. Nick hopes that someday she'll agree to speak with him. He says he wishes he could tell her how sorry he is and that he knows the pain he caused was selfish. He says he's trying every day to be the best version of himself. But to Corey, those words mean nothing. She says she doesn't know who Nicholas Shaughnessy is anymore. There's no point in responding to an apology she was never supposed to hear. According to Nick, she's supposed to be a ghost, and ghosts can't talk. Corey says she still loves who her son used to be before all of this happened, but she knows that boy is gone forever. And so is the life that she and Ted tried to build around him. Corey now lives out of state under a different name. She's determined to make the most of every day. Corey, if you somehow happen to hear this, please know that Corey and Gina, with the simple peridot engagement ring from 2011, will forever cherish the little bit of time we spent with you in gallery, and that every time I look at my ring, I think of you, Ted, and those lovable guard dogs. I didn't think it was going to get to me.
I mean, you knew them personally, so it's going to hit a little harder. You know, even though living here in Austin, I do kind of live in my own little bubble, so I never heard about this. So I had no idea what to expect, but I hate to say it, but I suspected Nick early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty clear from an outside perspective to see, hearing the story, you're like, oh, obviously it was him. I do, after I finished this script and have been thinking about it and like getting ready to record this, I do wonder if it hadn't been for Jackie, because I do think that she had more of a part in it than she got blamed for, if this would have happened. I really do wonder.
I mean, I wonder what he was like before he met Jackie. Was he as materialistic? Was he as focused on the money and the things as much as he ended up being? Like, how much of an influence did she have on all of that?
Right, because he's saying that he started questioning these things and thinking about things as a teenager, and he was a teenager when he met her.
Exactly.
And we all know how influential the people around us can be on our lives.
Especially when you're attracted to somebody and you want to impress them and you want to be the best version of yourself for them. You go above and beyond, damn, whatever your parents think or what you have to do to get there. And he took it just a little too far.
And the fact that they adopted him and gave him a life that he wouldn't have had otherwise, and this is what he did to them, just makes it that much worse. So, yeah, this story is so messed up, and I just felt like it was important to tell it as a local Austin case, because Ted and Corey were such wonderful people, and I hope Corey is out there living the best life that she can, given everything that she's going through. So,
exactly.
Yeah. with all that being said, it does feel really, really good to be recording again. And thank you to all of our listeners who stuck with us through the hiatus, and a big welcome to the new listeners who found us this year. And if you like what you hear, please do us a favor and tell a couple of friends about the podcast. Your recommendations help us grow, boost our serotonin levels, and keep us going. We have so many interesting cases coming up because Amber made a list that's about 20 pages long. So we've got some stories to tell you. So be sure to subscribe wherever you listen, and that way you'll never miss an episode. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok for visual content that complements each case, and YouTube for video versions of some cases, depending on how productive I'm feeling that week and whether or not we put on makeup. It really just depends on how we feel.
It's mostly me being like, no, I don't want to show my mug today. Please, for the love of God, no. So I'll own up on that one.
We like pajamas and messy buns, okay? Like, leave us alone. So you'll see us sometimes. So until next time, stay safe.
And make good choices.
Bye.
Oh my God, it's been so long.
I know.
Hi, Dustin. I don't know if you remember me. My name's Amber. Fucking month-long break turned into 9.
I know. I'm very nervous, but it's fine. We can do this.
We totally can do this. So
we got it.
In 2017, Nick and Jackie moved to college. Nope, that's not where I was supposed to. Is it? Am I?
Yes.
Where?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Why? I'm sorry. Nick had just placed a tracking device on the husband's car, which Kim could monitor. It's so convoluted. It took my brain to pick up on that. Okay, buddy. She wondered if they had been blackmailed or pressured into having her and Ted killed. Killed? Did I say that right? Why did that sound weird? What's wrong with me?
They didn't think she was actively hiring peeper? Wow.
She informed the officers that several months earlier, Cameron had been contacted about a job opportunity by a what? What did I just say? What?
Ma'am.
No. Incorrect, ma'am.